In today's video, I'm going to be telling you exactly what tulpas are. And then, of course, since this is a horror channel, I have to go over some disturbing things that have happened from people making tulpas. It's going to be a fun one. Sit tight. Hey humans, it's Hannah. If you have never heard of a tulpa before, or if you have and you're just not really sure what exactly it means, let me explain. A tulpa is basically the creation of an extremely complex and realistic imaginary friend. It is a separate entity from yourself, but your body and your mind is this friend's host. Sort of like tapping into your deep subconscious, but not really. I know it sounds confusing, so here's the metaphor that really helped me grasp exactly what this is. Pretend that you are an author or a writer for just a moment and you've created a character. You've created that character inside and out. You know its hair color, its eye color, its body type, its skin color, etc. But you also know its personality. You know exactly how it feels, how it would react to things, what its emotions are, what it thinks of, and it's different from you because it's a character. You as the author gets to know this character so well because you're writing this book on them. And it's almost like this character starts to take on a mind of its own where you don't even have to think that hard about it, because as you write, the character just kind of writes itself and reacts exactly how it would without you really having to think that hard about it. And that is how people create tulpas in the tulpa community. It's separate from themselves, but it exists in their body. People make tulpas for many reasons. One of the reasons being companionship. It has been known to help people with their loneliness if they don't have that many friends. Some people like to make tulpas so that they can look at a situation or a problem in a completely different way than they normally would, and it can help them live life. Their avatar can take on different forms. So even though it's in your mind, its form can be a doppelganger of yourself. It can be the dream partner, so the opposite gender or the same gender. It can also be a creature that's not even human. So this doesn't mean that you should just go make a tulpa. The whole tulpa community actually advises strongly against it, that you shouldn't just make one for no reason, just because it sounds fun. You should think really hard about it and have a specific purpose for it, because while they are actually a really great community and tulpas are not known for becoming evil, they still can go wrong if you're not super careful and don't follow a specific process. I want to also stress that making a tulpa does not mean you have dissociative identity disorder, or DID, or multiple personality disorder. Now, I am not a psychology expert by any means, and I don't claim to be, but just based on the research I've done, basically the difference is that DID usually results from a traumatic event or abuse from a long time ago, whereas making a tulpa is intentional. It doesn't come from a traumatic event usually, and it's something that you're doing on purpose. So I know how strange this probably sounds, and trust me, I felt the same way when I first started reading about this, but I got so engrossed in it and learned so much. And here's some reasons why you actually probably shouldn't be so quick to judge them. I was picturing this group of super weirdos that were just talking to their make-believe friends, but that's really not what it is at all. First of all, I talk to myself all the time. How many times have you talked to your dog or your cat or your other pet as if they're going to respond in a human way? The second reason you shouldn't judge it is because studies have actually shown that making a tulpa can significantly help people with their depression and anxiety. The third reason, if they're not hurting anybody, then who cares? It doesn't affect anybody around them for the most part, so if it makes them happy, then whatever. The fourth and most compelling reason that you should not judge it is that we actually see this on TV shows and movies and stories all the time, and it's extremely similar to the tulpa concept. For example, take Castaway. Tom Hanks makes a friend out of his volleyball. Nobody blames him for that. Have you ever watched that movie and thought, oh, that's so dumb? No, because he is so socially isolated that it makes perfect sense, and any of us would do that. In fact, you empathize with him and are super sad when the volleyball dies at the end. The second, how many of you have seen the show Dexter? Dexter has a tulpa pretty much because his dad is with him all the time, telling him alternatives and reasoning with him, and it seems very similar to me. Most famously, we have Fight Club. Tyler Durden was essentially a destructive Tulpa. And Tyler Durden became so strong and controlling that he created basically a cult, and the main character has to shoot himself in the cheek in order to snap out of it at the end. So the coolest thing about this is that for all intents and purposes, it's a real thing, but it's also not a real thing. It's kind of this paradox where it exists because you created it and it becomes so strong that it exists, but it also doesn't because it's also your imagination. There's an entire online community devoted to this, and they call themselves Tulpamancers. I will leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. It's extremely fascinating. Now on to the actual examples. I am a horror creepy things channel, so I do have to give some examples of tulpas that went horribly wrong. However, I just want to emphasize that I am not saying that the Tulpa community is bad in any way, shape, or form. 99.9% of tulpas are very helpful and good and don't ever do anything evil and don't turn evil. Just putting that out there so you know the following stories are just for fun. You've probably heard of Slenderman. Slenderman is a very creepy urban legend that took over the internet, I think back from like 2009, and has been created into all sorts of things. It's talked about all the time. Well, you may not have known that there's a very popular theory that Slenderman was actually created by something called the Tulpa effect. According to the Slenderman wiki, the Tulpa effect is the name given to the unintentional creation of a tulpa based on collective belief of a being with similar traits. Basically, Slenderman was brought into real existence in a way just because so many people truly believe in him. Kind of like Thumbelina. If you recall the horrific story from Wisconsin in 2014, two 12-year-old girls who lured their friend Peyton Lettner into the woods and proceeded to stab her 19 times. They later said that they did this to prove that Slenderman was real, to prove their loyalty to Slenderman, and so that Slenderman would not come and harm their own families. Luckily, Peyton survived because she is a warrior. This story is really fascinating because it is almost like the two girls made Slenderman into a tulpa because they believed so hard that he was real and he started to control their life. Again, of course, the girls did have some mental problems, so it's not like this is a normal occurrence. Now we get to the most famous story in the tulpa community, the tragic tale, I guess it's not tragic because it turned out okay in the end, of Coomer and Juiji. It's a popular story in the tulpa community because it basically tells you everything not to do when making a tulpa. There was a man named Coomer who from 2012 to 2014, he blogged very detailed accounts of his experience making a tulpa. He was a big fan of My Little Pony and created Juiji in the form of a My Little Pony. But as you read on in the blogs, everything's really great at first. Coomer is having some really great experiences with his tulpa, and then they started to experiment with Juiji taking over Coomer's body for small periods of time. And it kind of escalates as the months go on. Juiji starts writing some of the blog posts for Coomer, and she starts taking over Coomer's body for longer and longer periods of time. I read a ton of this blog, and it's creepy. I really did think that maybe this was just fake and it was another internet hoax that somebody learned about tulpas and tried to do it, but I don't think it is. It was really detailed and super realistic and weirdly mundane at the same time. Like everything that happens in the blog is really, really, really plausible, and I think that this really happened in one way or another. Coomer allows Juiji to become so powerful that she pretty much takes over his body almost full time. They kind of switch back and forth every now and then, but he gets really exhausted switching back and forth, so he kind of just lets her have the body for a long time. People are asking them questions in the blog, and that can get really dark and creepy too. Somebody asked if they are having suicidal thoughts, they should consider making a tulpa and then letting them take over their body permanently, switching in hopes of curing their self-harm thoughts. And Juiji, the tulpa, actually responds and says, "You absolutely should do that." I mean, if it helps you, that's great, but somebody shouldn't be giving that sort of medical advice to a random person. Another person asked how this all worked with family and friends if Juiji is in Coomer's body most of the time. And she explains that they just told family and friends that Coomer has been meditating more, and so he's slightly different than he used to be. And other than that, nobody really questioned it. And so little did they know, but it was usually the Tulpa and not actually him. I mean, this made me stop and think, what if one of your friends had secretly done this and didn't tell you, and you were actually talking to their Tulpa and not them? Keep that in mind the next time your friend seems like they're hiding something or starts acting differently. So it gets to the point where Coomer loses a lot of control over his body. He starts to disassociate and he starts to disconnect heavily with his physical being. He's so exhausted because of this that they post about how Juiji and him talked about her taking over his body permanently. It's where it gets really dark. When he is in his own body, Coomer starts to post about how he started experimenting with drugs, how he's slacking off at college and failing his classes, and his life kind of starts to spiral out of control because of his Tulpa. When he is in his own body, he writes some blog posts about how he regrets making a Tulpa. He wishes he could get rid of Juiji permanently, how he wants his freedom back and he wants his life back. But then soon after, Juiji will also post and say that he was lying and that he never wanted that, and they're still talking about her taking over. It's insanely creepy. The story has a happy ending. Coomer's okay in the end. He manages to slowly take control back and he gets his body back from Juiji, and the whole community is very happy for him. A lot of people on Reddit and stuff like that that talk about this story say that his biggest mistake was that he allowed the Tulpa to take possession over his body and switch with him way too early, like in the first week of this Tulpa's creation, and he should have waited. There's a certain process you're supposed to follow, and he should have waited until it was the proper time where he knew he had full control. So the third story, really briefly, I want to talk about So Weird, the TV show. Did you guys ever watch that? It was like a really old 90s, early 2000s TV show on Disney Channel where it was basically like a Twilight Zone for kids, and they made a whole episode about Tulpas, and Fee, the main character, meets this boy who at first she thinks the boy has telekinesis because he can move things around every time she's around, saves her from a car. But after talking to the boy more, she learns that he grew up in the foster system, and so because of this lonely life that he was leading as a kid, he created his own Tulpa to keep him company. But the Tulpa became so strong that he started coming around everywhere he was and wouldn't let him have other friends because he kept harming people. And he does manage to take control back over this Tulpa in the end, but it's a really cool episode. It's cool that we probably all learned about this as kids, at least if you're around my age, and we just totally forgot about it. The last story I'm going to tell is a really great creepypasta that was written called The Tulpa. The narrator tells a story about how he wanted to do a psych experiment because he was short on cash. So he agrees to this 6 months experiment where every day he would go to this room. The researchers would put him in a room for many hours every single day, and he would be alone. He'd have sensors on his head, and the researchers asked him to create a double of himself, to imagine this doppelganger of himself. Basically asked him to create a Tulpa. They told him that if he got restless because he was staying still so long, that instead of moving around himself, he should ask his Tulpa to move around for him and imagine the Tulpa doing it. He gets bored after a couple months, and so he starts interacting with the Tulpa more and bringing it more and more to life. He starts to have conversations with the Tulpa. They start to play games. He realizes the Tulpa can kind of tap into his subconscious, so he starts asking it about things that he couldn't remember before, or his childhood memories and stuff like that. Months go by and he starts interacting and getting so close to his Tulpa that he becomes socially isolated, and he stops interacting with his friends and basically the outside world, and his Tulpa starts to take more and more control. One day his friend shows up at his house unannounced, and he is basically demanding where he's been and why he's not responding to any of the calls, and he's really upset. Instead of talking it out, his Tulpa tells him to hit his friend And so he does, and they get in a fight. The Tulpa is in the corner smiling about this the whole time. The Tulpa starts to become taller, uglier, more like a monster, crooked teeth, and starts swearing and yelling at the host. So of course he tries to shut down his Tulpa and tries to take control over his body again. But the researchers get really mad when he does this, and they basically take him, drug him up, and strap him to a table. And they leave the Tulpa with him to torment him. He starts physically and psychologically torturing him until the Tulpa finally says he's going to gut everyone that he's ever loved, and he's going to start with his sister. The Tulpa finally leaves, and the main character is finally able to escape. When he comes back, he figures out that these researchers have up and gone. They are completely gone. There's no trace of the room or the things he was hooked up to or any people at all. The story ends with him getting a call from his own mother saying that his sister has been the victim in a recent spree of killings where she was gutted. And we are left to assume that the Tulpa is going to return and basically kill everybody he loves as promised. Tulpas are insanely cool. I'll be honest, after reading about all this, it's kind of tempting to try to make one yourself. I kind of want to, just to see what would happen, or it sounds really cool to be able to be outside of yourself a lot, you know? But I don't trust myself enough to do it properly and everything like that, and I would be afraid of turning into my Tulpa around my friends and family. But for those of you that actually do it and do it well, I think it's really cool. No judgment from me. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know if you have ever heard of Tulpas, or if you would ever consider making one with caution. If you want more videos on mysteries, creepy, and disturbing things, please subscribe to my channel down below. I put out new videos every Tuesday and Friday. I'll see y'all in the next one.